Hello, my friend, and welcome to another episode of the Red Delta Project podcast, where we take a principle-based approach to health and fitness and use simple methods like grind-style calisthenics and satisfying healthy eating strategies to maximize your results. Today's episode is diving deep into this notion of progressive overload. I did a teaser video a little bit back earlier this week on how progressive overload is like mind-muscle connection and time under tension, where it's a super important concept to understand, but is often misunderstood and misapplied within our fitness culture. And first and foremost, why is it important? Well, to put it bluntly, progressive overload is the thing that makes your workouts effective for changing your body however you want. If you want to get bigger and stronger and faster and leaner and whatever you want to get from your workouts, progressive overload is the thing that makes it happen. So I wanted to take today's episode and not only look at the realities of progressive overload, but how to apply it for your specific results. Because it's not as simple as just work harder and hope it all pans out in the end. Because like any tool, progressive overload is one of those things that if it's misapplied, will cause you to travel down a road that may take you away from the results you actually want. So let's start with a quick recap of the other video. One thing is to know that progressive overload is progression of any sort. It's not just progression of load. It's kind of a misunderstood term because it's got that term load in there because people think, well, that means you lift more weight. And yeah, that is a form of progressive overload, but it can also mean running faster, improving your technique, breathing better. Any sort of improvement in how you do something is a progressive overload by definition. So don't get stuck into thinking it's just one thing, because oftentimes your ability to get the results you want will depend on progressing many different variables in your training, not just one. And oftentimes when people get stuck in plateaus, it's because they get too tunnel visioned on one variable and they ignore all the other things that are holding them back. The second thing to recognize about progressive overload is that it doesn't come necessarily from something external to yourself. It's not a weight, it's not an advanced technique, it's not a program or something that you buy or consume on the internet. It's actually an internal process. It's mental, believe it or not. And this is because when you have a progressive overload, that load is inherently coming from a neural demand created by your brain. As I explain in my book, Smart Bodyweight Training, the whole reason why your body changes and adapts is due to the response of your neural demand from your mind. So when you do an activity of any kind, right, you're creating a demand from your mind saying, hey body, I need you to be able to do this thing in a certain way. And what progressive overload is when your brain says, all right, you're doing it a certain way, now I need you to step it up and improve it in some way, shape, or form. You did it X, now X plus 1 rep, or 5 pounds, or 5 seconds faster, or whatever. That's the actual nature of progressive overload. So if you're trying to rely or seek answers from something external, but the neural demand doesn't change, you're not really going to have that much of a reliable progressive overload, and you're going to stay stuck no matter what kind of program or exercise or routine that you're following. So let's get into the nitty-gritty of what kind of progressive overload is best for your results. In Smart Bodyweight Training, I talk about how there's a million different results that you can go after, but for the most part, everybody's trying to do one of 3 things. They're either trying to build muscle and strength, lose weight, or improve their functional ability to do something. And everything is just some variation thereof, right? So I keep things real simple in that when you're trying to either build muscle and strength, functional capacity, or burn fat, what you're essentially doing in your workouts is you're applying the tension in your muscles from that neural demand in a specific way to satisfy those requirements. It's worth repeating, though, that you're always going to have all 3 of these no matter what kind of training you're doing, because all forms of physical activity require time under tension for building strength. They're going to require some sort of specific functional requirement, and they're also going to burn calories just because that's what happens when you use muscle tension. So you always have all 3. But when you are training for muscle and strength, functional capacity, or calorie burn, then you're just tipping the scales to emphasize one of these 3 things. And how you do that is if you're trying to build muscle and strength, you emphasize using tension to create more tension for more time in the muscle, time under tension. If you're trying to improve your functional capacity, you're using tension to satisfy the functional requirements of that activity. So if you're trying to shoot a basketball, you're essentially using your mind to create a demand on your muscles to move the basketball or dribble or move on the court in a specific way to do it better. And then if you're trying to burn fat and calories, you're using tension to essentially just burn fuel. So when you're trying to either build muscle and strength, functional capacity, or burn fuel, the progressive overload means you have more time under tension, you're getting more proficient at satisfying the functional demands of that activity, or you're burning more calories. So let's say you're trying to lose weight and you're saying, Matt, I want to lose some weight. How do I do this? And of course, diet's a big influence to it. It's 50% of the equation. But don't neglect exercise. You can physically burn quite a few calories if you know what you're doing. And increasing caloric expenditure, or ICE, through creating muscle tension is one of the ways that you can do it. Now, there are three main variables that come into ICE that you can progress. You have how much muscle you're using, you have how much tension or intensity you're working those muscles at, and you have how long you're using those muscles for. So, for example, you're not burning a lot of calories if you're just opening and closing your hand. But if you do full body activities like cross-country skiing, you've got a lot of muscle being used, which basically burns a lot more calories per unit of time. That's why full body activities like swimming, cross-country skiing, rowing machines, and so on are great calorie burners. Intensity is the other variable, which is basically how hard are your muscles working. The harder your muscles work, the more calories you're burning per unit of time. So if you're walking and you start walking faster, you're burning more calories. There's your progression. If you go up an incline and you're moving more against the pull of gravity, there's a progression. And then the last one is time. You're going to burn more calories doing an activity a certain way for an hour than you would if you did it for 20 minutes. So basically, more, just doing it more. So you can have a progressive overload to help you burn more calories by either using activities that use more muscle, you work at a higher intensity, or you go for a longer period of time. All right, let's talk about functional demand now. And you want to say, I don't want to lose weight, I don't care so much about that, but I want to improve my golf game, or I want to be able to get up out of bed without knee pain, or play with the grandkids without getting exhausted. What can I do that? So any sort of objective you have that says, I want to be able to physically do something, is a functional demand. For that, you have the specific adaptation to impose demand, or the progressive overload for the specific functional requirements of that activity. And this is where things can get really complicated and detailed pretty fast, because you look at something like throwing a sidekick, there's a lot of functional details in that. You need stability, you need mobility, you need strength, you need coordination, you need breath control. So that's why whenever your objective is, I want to do something better, you want to have your mind focused on improving one or two functional qualities of that activity. This is where having a coach really comes in handy, because they're basically functional performance experts in a particular activity. So if you want to improve your ability to do something, seek out a coach or information that's specific about doing that activity. Proficiency, in other words. Hard work does not produce better results if it does not result in an increase in proficiency. So you always want to be saying, how do I improve my proficiency in my ability to do this specific activity? And lastly, you're like, all right, functional, that's great. Burn calories, fine, but come on, I want to make some gains. I want to get bigger and stronger. In that regard, you want to look at the tension application of time under tension. So you have two main variables. You have how much tension is in the muscle and how long the tension is there for. And progressing both of those is the key to making your muscles bigger and stronger. But there's a lot of variables below that as well. For example, tension in the muscle. Great, wonderful, awesome. But a lot of times we have trouble doing that because that mind-muscle connection, being able to put tension into your muscle, is a skill. And unfortunately, because of our sedentary lifestyle these days, it's a skill we're eroding quite quickly, especially along that posterior chain. I see people all the time, and they're like, I can't really get their back to engage. I tell them pull their shoulder blades back, and they're just kind of like this? How does that work? So it takes practice, which is why in my grind style calisthenics method, the beginning of every workout is improving your proficiency in tension control, waking up the muscles, improving how well you use your muscles, because 90% of your success in your workouts depends purely on neuromuscular proficiency. If you can improve how well you use your back muscles are probably going to get bigger and stronger pretty much no matter how you work them, no matter what tool or routine or program you're using. But if your neuromuscular proficiency is suffering and lacking, almost nothing's going to work for you, because you can't have a progressive overload on that muscle if your brain can't really talk to that muscle in the first place. So improving your mind-muscle connection, your neuromuscular proficiency, is the foundation of getting tension in the muscle. And then once that becomes more proficient, you also need a tension demand, or necessitate a certain amount of tension. This is where weight comes in. This is where technique comes in. This is where your program comes in. Basically, we can put tension in a muscle through just conscious thought, but it's more effective if you have a reason for the tension to be there. If you're saying, okay, just flex, it's like, all right, how hard do I flex? How much tension do I put there? But if you're saying, all right, do push-ups with your feet on an elevated surface and you have more weight on your hands, suddenly there's more of a necessity for more tension in your chest, shoulders, and triceps. So the resistance, in most cases, doesn't create tension, but it necessitates the tension. So you got mind-muscle connection, you've got a necessity or a reason for the tension to be there. That's going to be your biggest variables in how much tension is in the time under tension. And then you just have time. How long is it there for? You can do this by reps. You can do this by time, physical time. You can do this by changing also the amount of time versus relative rest, so shorter rest periods, or how many reps you can do in a given amount of time. Like if you do 50 push-ups in 5 minutes and then shorten it down to 50 push-ups in 4 minutes, that's going to create more of a fatigue response in the muscles. So the theory is that more fatigue creates more muscle growth. There's a little debate on it, but basically it's a variable that you can progress with, because that is a progressive element. So time under tension, those are some of the biggest progressive overload variables that you can use to build your muscle to be bigger and stronger. So that's basically it. If you want to create a stimulus for change, you have to create a neural demand to progress the demand on how well you're using your muscles for either time and tension in the muscle, the functional capacity of your ability to do something, or just making your body work harder and churn out more calories to further facilitate weight loss. I hope that you found this episode enlightening and informative. If you want to learn more, check out my books, Grind Style Calisthenics and Smart Bodyweight Training. Their links are down below in the description. Also, thoughts, comments, questions down below as well. Thank you very much for listening. I sincerely appreciate it, and I'll talk to you next week. Till then, be fit, live free.